Going beyond the headlines. Asking the questions you want answered. Exploring government policies and how they impact you. We are delving deeper.
Good evening and welcome to Delving Deeper. I'm your host, Sono Lala. Joining us over the next few days are members of the National Advisory Committee on Constitutional Reform. We are joined with former House Speaker, Mr. Nizam Mohammed, and economist, Dr. Terrance Farrell. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
We have a lot to talk about in terms of constitutional reform. Mr. Mohammed, can you tell us about some of the rights that are enshrined in the Constitution and some of the proposed changes?
Well, I'm glad that Dr. Farrell has raised this question of accountability, and because that goes to the root of our problems in our country. Also, he has mentioned something to me, to my mind, that is extremely and critically important. He has postulated that crime is a constitutional problem. Crime is affecting the rights of our people, the right of free movement, the right to choose, the inalienable rights that we possess, the right to life, the right of being the kind of free person that you want to be. All of these inalienable rights are being affected by the present state of our constitutional arrangement. So we are saying that we must revisit those rights, and we have to have extended rights because we have moved on from those colonial days. We are talking about rights that pertain, new rights in a revised constitution that pertain to the environment.
That's right.
The status of the woman in society today is quite different to 40 years or 48 years ago since the Wooding Commission report came about. So that those are just two areas that come to my mind. And you have a number of other new areas, expanded areas of rights to which the people are entitled, and more than that, to be protected when those rights are afforded the people. I would like for Dr. Farrell to tell us about some of those in a little more detail because they're really important to us.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've done as well is that we have looked at the fact that our Constitution, 1976, almost 50 years old. A lot has happened globally in terms of international human rights law and so on since that time. Now, the rights section of our Constitution, that is the fundamental rights and freedoms, which is chapters 4 and 5 of the Constitution, sections 4 and 5 of the Constitution, they were not basically changed from the 1962 Constitution, which was sections 1 and 2 of the old 62 Constitution. Since that time, we have had the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. We've had the Convention on the Rights and Status of Women. We've had the Convention on the Rights of Children. We have had conventions around people with disabilities. We have had this whole movement to what are called economic, social, and cultural rights, the rights to the environment. People are now concerned about climate change. Climate change is an existential threat to the planet, but it is also, importantly, an existential threat to small island developing states like Trinidad and Tobago, like Barbados, like Jamaica, sea level rising. So one of the things that has been happening over the course of the last many years is that many countries have been putting into their constitutions precisely those economic, social, and cultural rights. Cultural rights, for example, the right of people to cultural expression. That if you have a society that has different kinds of ethnic groups and so on that have their own cultural expressions, it doesn't mean that they are not. China, for example, says that they have 56 ethnic groups in China. each ethnic group has the right to have its own cultural expressions. The South African Constitution, for example, talks about the right to housing, to adequate housing, the right to water. And many countries, for example, in India, India's constitution goes back to 1948, 1949. And they did not put those rights in, those economic, social, and cultural rights. But what they did is that they said, for example, in respect to the right to water, they said, how could you have the right to life if you have no water? And so therefore they said, no, people have a right to have water and access to water. So in our recommendations, we have put back in the fundamental rights which were there before. We have added a couple, for example, the right to vote, which was always implicit in the Constitution, not explicit. We've put that in explicitly. We've also added economic, social, and cultural rights. All those rights to adequate housing, to water, and so on and so forth. We put those in. But also importantly, Sunil, we have put in what the Wooding Commission had recommended, but which never made it into the 1976 Constitution. We have put in citizens' duties and responsibilities. Why is that? We are saying because citizens have rights, absolutely, which they need protected from the state affecting their rights, but each of us as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago also has certain set of duties and responsibilities to the state and to each other. And so we put that back into the Constitution, to the proposed Constitution. So you have your fundamental rights, you have expanded economic, social, and cultural rights, and you also have citizens' duties and responsibilities in what will now be, and hopefully will be, an expanded chapter dealing with rights and freedoms of the individual.
The caste system in India is something that is so entrenched, and we have known it for all our lives. And 1948-49, from the inception of the Indian Constitution, that they put into the Indian Constitution provisions for the protection of marginalized groups. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have heard it said over and over again that every group in Trinidad, every group feels marginalized. And we are saying every group can have a stake and can claim ownership when every group participates in the production of their constitution, when they are given ownership of their constitution. Then a number of misnomers, a number of misunderstandings, misconceptions will be corrected, and all of these matters will fall in place in terms of the structure of government, in terms of accountability, which is one of the root problems that we discovered during our consultation with the people. So in terms of all that has to do with good governance, you will find when the people insist that we adhere to those noble principles that will be reflected in a revised constitution, people will have to step up to the plate and make the necessary adjustments. And moving from colonialism to neo-colonialism, we are now going to go to the true spirit of republicanism, where the people, we the people, will take charge of our destiny, and we will dictate the direction that our society should go.
Yeah. The Prime Minister, he was arguably dropping some hints that we would have an election this year. He has dispelled that rumor now at the special convention that the PNM held recently. In terms of fixed dates for election, I know that's one of the recommendations from the report and so on. We've always heard, I remember back in high school, back probably in university, remember hearing Patrick Manning, the Prime Minister, saying he have the election in his back pocket.
The date of the election.
Right, the discretion always remains with the Prime Minister in office to call that election date.
Yes.
In terms of that recommendation, in terms of the fixed dates and in terms of the term limits for Prime Ministers, what's the rationale behind this and what can we see in the recommendations from you all?
Well, so those two in particular have come out of the public consultations. It's not necessarily that we initiated those things. When you look at the set of recommendations, you see those at the very top of the list. Now, and we understand the rationale for that. The fixed date, for example, has a very sensible rationale in our view. Number one, you want to get away from this notion about the Prime Minister having the thing in the back pocket and he can call the election anytime he wants and so on, right? That is arbitrary. It came out again of our British tradition. That has always been the case in the United Kingdom. Up to now, we can call the election. Sunak called the election the other day and lost. But there are also arguments on the other side why you should have a fixed date. For example, people in the business community tell you that if you call an election anytime, it disrupts business activity because you don't know how to plan. Whereas in the United States, for example, people say the election is going to be on the first Monday or Tuesday, whatever it is, in November. Everybody knows that. You organize your campaigning around that. You organize business activity around that, and the date is fixed. So what it does is that it gives you a date certain that allows the business community and the private sector and so on to carry out their business in an organized fashion, not to have something at the whim and fancy of the Prime Minister of the day. The second thing is that we have here a dry season and a wet season. And as you remember, there was an issue with the Elections and Boundaries Commission because when the election day came, there was a lot of rain. And there was a decision that was made to extend the voting hours, and that went to court because people are saying the EBC has no such authority to do that, and so on and so forth. If you had the election in the dry season, then those things will simply not arise. So we have said, look, it makes sense. It's a good policy to have that. It's predictable. When is the best time to have it? Have it in the dry season. If you look at, you can have it around carnival time. You can have it around exam time for the school children who are doing, the Cape or whatever it is and so on. You don't have it around Easter time. We said, in our view, the best time to have it is somewhere between the middle of April and the end of May. Just fix the date inside of there. Now, it does raise an issue for the Constitution, in that the Constitution says, I can't remember, I think it's section 68 or something like that, of the Constitution says that the life of the Parliament is 5 years, okay? Right. So our parliaments can exist for 5 years plus 3 months, because you have up to 3 months after that to call an election. Now, what would happen if you have a fixed date for election and the government collapses in office? Right? There's a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister and the government falls. What would then happen? Well, we said it's very simple. What you then do is that whenever that election date is, so you could have an election not on the fixed date. You could have an election in September, for example. But what you then do, if the election is held in September, you count 4 years from that date, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the next general election will be on that fixed date following that 4th anniversary. So the life of the Parliament will not necessarily be 5 years, but it's going to be more than 4 years. Interestingly, a lot of people who made submissions to us were suggesting that the Parliament's life should be 4 years, just like in the United States. It's 4 years. In fact, in the United States, as you know, in some cases, they have a kind of a rolling system, right? Some senators are elected for 6 years, and some people are elected for 2 years, the House of Representatives, and so on. And they have elections almost every year in the United States. The problem with elections is that elections are a costly thing. They cost a lot of money to run elections. And so therefore, we don't think that we can afford to have, as a small country like Trinidad and Tobago, given our resources, to be having elections every 2 years and so on. So we think that the fixed election date, as recommended by the people, is a very good idea. On term limits, we think it's also a very good idea as well, that the Prime Minister and the President should have term limits, except that what we have said is that a Prime Minister can come back. In the case of Guyana, for example, Guyana has 2 terms for their president, and you can't come back. In the United States, you have 2 terms for the President of the United States, and you can't come back. Barack Obama can't come back as President of the United States. Trump can come back because Trump served 1 term, he lost, and so he can come back again. And by the way, in the United States, that thing about term limits for the president was only done in the 1940s. Right? Before that, a president of the United States could serve as many terms as we had. Our first prime minister here, Eric Williams, served for 25 years. Between 1956 and 1981, we had one prime minister. In the case of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew served for like, I don't know, was more than 25 years, okay? What people are saying is, no. Let you serve 2 years, 2 terms, you serve 10 years, as the case may be. It's time for you to go home, take a rest. And if you want to come back after 5 years, then you can come back. And that's what we put forward in our recommendations.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that Dr. Mohammed Irfan Ali from Guyana, this is actually his last term as well.
That's right.
But I heard you said, Dr. Farrell, that that recommendation, April, May, for the fixed date, is it going to be on a date, or let's say possibly a Sunday, the second Sunday in May, or is it an actual date, or could it be like the second Sunday, or is it more
No, so what you do is you have a formula, right? It probably, in our case, it wouldn't be Sundays because of religious reasons here. I mean, interestingly, Venezuela has the election on a Sunday. Many countries wouldn't probably have it on a day that is like fixed as a religious day, like Fridays for Muslims or Sundays for Christians and so on. So in our case, it would be a weekday. And I think you want to say it's a Monday or Tuesday, and you could say it's the second Monday in the second week of May or something like that, you know. Because there are no, in fact, we checked, there are no public holidays in that period. Between the middle of April and towards the end of May, when you have Corpus Christi and Indian Arrival Day, there are no public holidays in that period. So it's in fact a fairly good period to do that.
Yeah.
Why should we have an individual deciding on our election date when that individual came to the country 5 years before, let us say, and asked for us to put the affairs of state in his hands as the leader of a political party, and he wants to serve us. So he being placed, he has won the confidence of the people, and he is there and he is serving us for 5 years. Why should he have that kind of authority? He went there with our permission. And now we have to get his permission to vote him to continue in office or to get out of office. It is illogical, and it runs contrary to the spirit of true democracy. This is the people's country, and they cannot all get together to govern the affairs of state. So we have inherited a system on which we are building so that there is a structure for proper and effective governance. Now, when we are following that, how does this arbitrary power being given to an individual fit into the scheme of things? We are taking away the people's power and giving it to one man or one woman for that matter, so that this question or this problem of giving politicians this kind of arbitrary power, it is not in keeping with good governance anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world. Good and civilized governance. We do not want to create avenues for the build-up of cults nor dictatorships under the guise of democracy. And we have to be open, and we've got to be fair about matters of this nature. So I believe that anyone being against a fixed date for election at the end of a term cannot or ought not to succeed in holding out on that.
There's a proposal to increase the number of senators to 55, with 5 mandatory for Tobago. With that, we get 10 independent senators, and I believe 40 would be elected by proportional representation.
Yes.
Explain how does this system entail, and and how does it affect the current system?
Right. Well, this is one of the more fundamental ones, because one of these came out of the discussions with the people, with the submissions from the people, and also goes back to the Wooding Commission report. Wooding Commission had recommended proportional representation, but the Wooding Commission report had recommended a unicameral system. That is to say, you don't have a House of Representatives and the Senate. They said that we should go to one house, unicameral, one. Our system is bicameral. We kept the bicameral system to have the House of Representatives and the Senate. However, the 1976 Constitution kept the first past the post system. It's also called single member plurality system. The single member plurality system, or first past the post system, is a very good system for getting certainty in the election. Okay? So I can have in a constituency, I can have 5 people running for the constituency, I can have 10 people running for the constituency, but I have one person who wins the constituency. Now the first thing is that if I have 5 people running or 10 people running in, say, San Fernando East or San Fernando West or in Port of Spain South, somebody could win that constituency with 25% of the vote. If there are 5 people running, one person could win that constituency with 25% of the people who have voted. And in fact, you could have a whole parliament elected, House of Representatives elected, under first past the post system with less than 50% of the vote. In fact, it happens all the time. Just consider this. And you can do the research. The Labour government in the United Kingdom recently, for the election that happened last July the 4th, the Labour government is said to have won a landslide in the House of Commons. They had 400 and something seats. The Labour government won that election with 33% of the vote. The Labour government won a landslide victory in the United Kingdom. It's called a landslide victory, with 30-something% of the vote. That's what happens in first past the post system. Now what people also don't realize is the United Kingdom has first past the post system for elections, for their general elections. But they have proportional representations for elections in Scotland, in Wales. Local government elections are all done on the basis of proportional representation. It is only the general election for Westminster is done on this first past the post basis. The problem with first past the post is that you end up very often with these minority governments, governments which do not have the support of the majority of the people in a constituency, or sometimes the whole electorate. You have minority governments. And that has been the case in Trinidad and Tobago as well. In fact, we showed in our report that several of the general elections that we have had here have produced governments which have had minority support. The good thing about it is that first past the post produces a government. You don't have a situation, for example, like in the Netherlands. Netherlands is supposed to be the most proportional system in the world. Israel, most proportional, one of the most proportional systems in the world. What happens in those situations, as has happened in the Netherlands recently, is that you win the election with 30-something% of the vote. You then get into a long period, could be months. In the case of Israel, it could be longer than that, a year, where the parties are negotiating with each other to determine who is going to form the government. That leads to instability. It is not good for government. And particularly for a small island developing state like Trinidad and Tobago, political stability is important. In the United Kingdom, you have an election today, Rishi Sunak loses, and Keir Starmer walks into number 10 Downing Street the following day. There's no negotiation. It's clear who's won and who gets into office. So you want that. But at the same time, you don't want to have a situation where people's votes are wasted. So I vote for Sunil, for example, but Sunil is not going to win because Sunil is representing some party that is never going to win a seat in the House, right? So as far as I'm concerned, my vote has been wasted. So what we are recommended is a system that is very much like the system in New Zealand. It's not quite what is called a mixed member plurality system, except that what we said is that we happen to have 2 houses, the lower House of Representatives and the Senate. We said, when you go to the polling booth, your ballot paper has 2 pieces to it. On one side of it, I am voting for my constituency representative. I want Nizam, or I want Sunil, or I want Marvin as my constituency representative for Arima or for Oropoch and so on. But on the other side of the ballot paper, I have a list of political parties, not names of people, of political parties. And I can tick off a political party, right? I can vote for the NTA or the PGV or the whatever, RJR, whoever it is I want. That then determines who goes to the Senate. So for the Senate, what you will have, so I have elected my constituency representative, but on the other side, I am electing a party for the Senate. The party now would produce a list of people that they have. They say, we said 40. So a party, any party, would produce a list of 40 names that is known to the electorate or not known to the electorate, doesn't matter. It's called the list system of proportional representation. And depending on the votes that you get in the general election, you get a certain proportion of the seats in the Senate based on the votes that your party gets. Subject to a threshold. You must get at least, say, 5% of the votes. If you're getting 1%, 2%, we're not going to put you. But if you get at least 5%, you get a seat or more than one seat in the Senate. So you have proportional representation in the Senate based on a party basis, and you have first past the post in the lower house based on first past the post. So what does that do? It means that my vote is not wasted, right? I may not get the constituency representative I want, but the party that I might want to get in the parliament can get representation, can have a seat in the Senate. They may have 1 or 2 seats and so on, but at least they have a voice in the Senate. Whereas in first past the post system, they have no voice at all. And we are saying that that's a better system. It's a more democratic system. It avoids the problem of wasted votes that we say.
And we have had the practical example here in Trinidad and Tobago. As Dr. Farrell has said, we have had, under the first past the post system, we have had governments in power with a minority of the electorate. And on the other hand, in 1981, you had the situation with the ONR that obtained 81,000 votes.
91,000 votes.
91,000 votes.
And got not a single seat.
And did not get a single seat. And the party that got 8 seats and formed the opposition got less votes than the ONR. 91,000 people voted for a particular party and they never got representation in accordance with their preference for an entire 5 years. So you have a good example of why we keep complaining since we have attained independence about alienation. If we have a system of proportional representation, it is clear from what Dr. Farrell has said, you will get people more and more interested in participating in the electoral system because they know that their votes
are going to be counted.
Will be counted, and most importantly, that you will get a better reflection in terms of representation from a system that is fairer than first past the post.
But so we don't have to go back to 1981. We can go back to 2007. The Congress of the People, the COP, got 140-something thousand votes, and the same thing happened. You see, so the system, first past the post system is good, as I said, in the sense that it's clear about having who wins and who loses. But the problem is that you have these wasted votes. The problem is that you have these minority governments. And you know, if you look at let us say Guyana, for example. Guyana has a list system of proportional representation. Why we have advocated for first past the post for the House of Representatives, it is that people are also saying that they want to have a constituency representative. In the case of Guyana, for example, when you have a list system, there's really no constituency representative. People are voting for a list for the whole country. who get into the parliament in Guyana. In the case of Trinidad, people are saying very clearly, I want to know that this person is my representative for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's East, or for San Fernando East. I want to know that that is the person who I put in parliament to represent my constituency. And first past the post will in fact deliver that. But also, the other interesting thing, Sonal, if I may just go slightly, I don't know whether this was one of the questions you were going to ask, but we see the role of the parliamentary representative as being absolutely critical. The report and the recommendations create a more powerful parliament because we're expanding the number of people in the parliament. We're suggesting limiting the number of government ministers who can come from the Senate and from the House of Representatives. What does that mean? It means, and we're limiting the number of government ministries that there are. What does that mean? It means that you have a backbench in the House. What does that mean? It means that the Parliament can now more effectively carry out its responsibility for scrutiny, for the scrutiny of legislation, because now our parliamentarians are part-time people. We are saying a parliamentarian is a full-time job, and they should be paid appropriately as a full-time job. And Parliament has a responsibility to scrutinize legislation. Parliament also has a responsibility for the oversight of the independent institutions in the country, the service commissions, the office of the DPP, the judiciary. All of those institutions need to have parliamentary oversight. But right now, parliamentary oversight is not very effective because we simply don't have enough parliamentarians working on a full-time basis to carry out that job. We are saying expand the number of people who are in parliament, send fewer of them to become government ministers, okay? So some will still be in the parliament, but you have more parliamentarians in the parliament to actually carry out parliamentary duties. One other point, a parliamentarian does two things. A lot of people will say, I don't see my parliamentary representative. I elect him to parliament and then we never see him. The reason is, part of the reason for that is because a parliamentarian has both local responsibilities for the constituency they're representing, but they also have, more importantly, national responsibilities. Legislation, national. Oversight of international treaties, that's national. All those things require somebody who is representing Diego Martin Central to be able to also address those broader national issues. So a parliamentarian is a busy person. A parliamentarian is somebody who needs to have staff to help him deal with those issues. And so therefore, you want to have a constituency representative, but you also want to have somebody who is enabled to engage in dealing with those national issues on the part of the national parliament of Trinidad and Tobago.
You tie up the idea of increasing the number of parliamentarians because the work of the parliament must go on. And you link that to the point that Dr. Farrell has made about accountability.
Yes, exactly.
And I am suggesting, or I am indicating, that accountability runs through every single issue
That's right.
that we raise in this discussion.
Yes.
When you tie up Parliament's role with accountability, and you look at what is happening in our Parliament at present, when last did you hear a report on the Office of the Ombudsman, the operations of that institution? When last did you ever hear that being debated in Parliament?
No.
And you have a number of other state agencies that are accountable to Parliament, and they present their reports on an annual basis, and we hear nothing of those reports. Parliament is not functioning properly in that regard on the question of oversight.
Of those
As a result of lack of oversight, you have lack of accountability.
Exactly.
And as a result of lack of accountability, you have total chaos across the board.
Non-performance and non-performance.
Bad performance and non-performance.
Yep.
And you have that large chunk within the public service. They hide behind those kinds of deficiencies Why is it the public service in Trinidad and Tobago is where it is? It is because people, the system is not properly structured to encourage production and accountability.
Yep.
And this is what we are trying to fix as a committee advising the government. But we are not, I hasten to say once more, we were not put there to write or rewrite a constitution. And when people make this allegation about we are not qualified, which is an insult to the members of the committee,
Well, let's not go there.
and we are not qualified to do what we are doing things differently to all those who were qualified before from 1974 coming down. We are doing it in a different way, and that is we are asking the people to take responsibility and take charge and insist that our voices be heard and we present what is in the best interest of Trinidad and Tobago for good and effective governance.
So let me give you another example. I mean, you may have other questions. Let me give you another example of what we focus on that is missing in the Constitution. So it's not just a question of looking at things that we need to fix that is there. There are things in the current Constitution that are missing. For example, our Constitution does not define anywhere the relationship between a government minister and a permanent secretary. Permanent secretaries are mentioned in the Constitution in one section, but permanent secretaries are extremely important offices. The head of the public service, for example, is a title, but it is not a constitutional office. The head of the public service, who is supposed to be the permanent secretary to the prime minister, actually has no authority over the other permanent secretaries or over the public service. We said, no, we've got to fix that. We've got to put in place a system which defines the relationship between the minister and the permanent secretary, and then defines the role of the permanent secretary in relation to the rest of the public service. And so we have made particularly that recommendation, and that these things must be guided by what we call a cabinet manual, similar to what you have in New Zealand, what you have in the United Kingdom now, actually. You have a manual which tells the minister, these are my responsibilities, and tells the permanent secretary, these are my responsibilities.
Dr. Farrell, I like the fact that you use me as an example for people to vote for me, but I have no political aspirations. Join us tomorrow evening as we continue our discussion on constitutional reform. I am Sonolala. On behalf of the entire group, have a great night.